Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report for Wednesday, August 23rd, 2017, 8th year of Chungi, the 7th month and 2nd day in that holy, heavenly calendar. I'm Tim Miller, sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon, and I'm with Mr. Greg Knoll this morning again, an entrepreneur and owner of a small business. I'm not calling you small business owner anymore because you're not small.
6'2".
Yes, you're 6'2".
200 pounds.
Owner of a small business. All right, so let's go with the weather first. And it's 70 degrees in the Cheongguk area this morning, cloudy. And we had some rain overnight.
Yes, thunderstorms, wonderful lightning.
Wonderful lightning, clouds breaking, and not as warm today, going up to 79. It was 88, I think, yesterday. So, yeah, it's not as warm as it was yesterday. And this evening it'll be going down to 54 degrees, and then tomorrow 76. And so we're going to be in a few days of nice cool weather. We haven't had really very many hot days this year. In fact, I think it was hotter in April and May than it was in August, I think, probably.
Except for the last few days, it's been hot and muggy.
Yeah, yes. But, we're down to cool temperatures again. All right, let's go to our Rima. I'm in Daniel chapter 10 this morning, and I want to go to verses 18 and 19. Then there came again and touched me one like the appearance of a man, and he strengthened me, and said, O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be unto thee, be strong, yea, be strong. And when he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, and he said, Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me. And my Cheonseonggyeong Rima is from the book on earthly life and the spirit world, page 745. Father says, Now they must help us in order to receive blessings. The more they oppose us, the deeper into pit they will fall. Heavenly fortune is changing rapidly. In the future, they will clamor to have a picture of me hanging in each of their houses. From the spirit world, your ancestors will admonish you. Accordingly, those who hang up our flag and my picture and bow to it daily will enliven the work of resurrection of their ancestors, work of resurrecting their ancestors. So in Daniel, the verse in Daniel talks about someone in the physical world being encouraged by a spiritual being, that is one like the appearance of a man. So I think this is a spiritual being, either an angel or an ancestor or a spirit person. Probably, I think, an ancestor, or could be an angel. And also, Father says in Cheonseonggyeong talks about resurrecting our ancestors by doing good works here. That is and also by hanging up the flag and by having Father's picture and bowing to it daily, so as to resurrect our ancestors. And then our ancestors will admonish us. I think right now, especially in these times, in this time of judgment, it's very important that we be able to receive the cooperation from spirit world, so that we can do what needs to be done and also be strong, to be strong. Daniel talks about how this spiritual being touched the person in the physical world, and he was strengthened. And he said, okay, Lord, please speak to me now. Now I'm ready to receive your words. Lord, let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me. Take some strength to be able to receive the Lord's words, because the Lord's words are often not easy to receive. Do this, go there, or you're this way, so work on this thing. Not very comfortable words often. So we need to strengthen ourselves in order to receive His word in many cases, and that's what happened here in Daniel. Does this? Are you inspired to say anything about this?
Yeah, I think the palace. There's a beautiful portrait of Father when you walk into the palace, and one is compelled to bow to Father before doing anything else, going anything further. Oftentimes, people do a full bow or a half bow, and I think that is the first order of business going anywhere, is to bow to Father and to think of Father and to align one's heart and mind with Father. And then I do believe that the spiritual world is activated by such allegiance. And I think to try to do God's work in this world is folly unless you are totally connected to Father and Christ. So a lot of people say, well, don't, just do goodness, just be good. But it has to be goodness centered on Christ.
Yes.
And I think then there's spiritual power to be had.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm a big believer in angels. I constantly solicit their help through Heavenly Father. And I feel heavenly support many times in doing the work that I do. And I think it's an asset that God has given us that needs to be activated and utilized. It's like having tools, if you're a farmer and having tools and not using them to try to do cultivate the fields. So God has given us angels, and if we are vertically aligned with Christ and doing God's will, then the angels are more than happy to help us achieve the kingdom of heaven on earth.
Thank you. That's those wonderful words. Yes, we need to always be aligned with Christ and always be connected to Christ so that we can bring about His kingdom in this world. We are saved by grace. But as a result of our salvation, as a result of being saved, we work hard to bring His kingdom to this world so that all humanity can also be saved and receive the same grace that we have been able to receive. All right, let's take a short break, and we'll come back and start going through the news from a eternity perspective.
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun. To the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Wednesday, August 23rd, 2017, 7th month and the second day in this 8th year of Chungi. So last night there was a big rally for President Trump in Arizona. And the Drudge headline is, "A Powerhouse Trump Battles in Arizona." Fox says Trump goes on attack. President rails against media. Sitting Arizona senators. Who would that be? That, of course, is John McCain at the Phoenix rally.
I'm sure as a good Republican, he was by his side, wasn't he?
I don't think so,
I don't
actually.
think so.
The Drudge report is linking to the AP story. Let's check that out. What is this? Just okay, today. AP, the latest on Donald Trump's visit to Arizona, all times Pacific Daylight Time. President at 8:40 p.m., President Donald Trump says he thinks the U.S. will end up probably terminating the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement with Canada and Mexico at some point. Trump tells supporters at the Phoenix, Arizona rally that, personally, I don't think we can make a deal because we have been so badly taken advantage of. But he cautions he has yet to make up his mind. The U.S., Mexico, and Canada began formal negotiations last week to rework the 23-year-old trade pact that Trump slammed during his campaign as the worst in history. The Canadian and Mexican negotiators believe NAFTA needs to be updated, but they have defended the pact which eliminated most barriers on trade between the countries as an economic success story. This AP story is not, it's sort of a timeline thing. So let's go to the Fox News story. I think that's going to be a better story for us to go through. Of course, NAFTA, Trump was about to take the U.S. out of it when Jared Kushner gave a call to the Canadian Prime Minister and told him, hey, you better get on the phone with my father-in-law quick. He's about to sign a document. And so the Canadian Prime Minister called Trump, and so then Trump, as a result of that call, Trump sort of backtracked and said, okay, we'll negotiate first. Anyway, so about the rally in general, let's read that. A defiant President Trump rallied with his base for more than an hour Tuesday in Arizona, trashing the media over its coverage of his response to the recent violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, or criticizing the state's Republican senators for not getting behind him. The president also signaled during the Phoenix rally that he could soon pardon Joe Arpaio, the former sheriff of Maricopa County, famous for his tough stance against illegal immigration. But Trump was most animated when defending himself against accusations he wasn't forceful enough in condemning the white supremacists and racists who were protesting in Charlottesville earlier this month. He blamed the media for distorting his comments. At one point, the president pulled a piece of paper out of his jacket and reread his initial statements condemning the racists involved in the protests. Quote, did they report that I said that racism is evil? Unquote. Trump asked the media. The crowd yelled, no. You know why? Trump asked. Because they are very dishonest people. A 32-year-old counter-protester was killed in Charlottesville after police said a Nazi sympathizer rammed his car into a crowd. Nazi sympathizer who was not on anyone's membership list, right, of the organizations that were there. After the violence, the president faced criticism for blaming both sides for the unrest instead of just white nationalists. As Trump continued to rail against the media's coverage of him, the crowd began chanting, CNN sucks, CNN sucks, CNN sucks. These are sick people, Trump said of the media. You know the thing that I don't understand? You would think they'd want to make our country great again, and I honestly believe they don't. The events in Charlottesville cast a shadow over the rally, with Phoenix's Democratic Mayor Greg Stanton asking Trump last week to delay his rally in wake of the violence. The Charlottesville violence led cities across the country to consider removing Confederate statues, something Trump railed against Tuesday. Quote, they're trying to take away our culture. They're trying to take away our history, unquote, he said. A crowd of protesters formed outside the convention center Tuesday, but the president bragged that there were far more Trump supporters in attendance. Quote, all week, they're talking about the massive crowds that are going to be outside, unquote, Trump said. Where are they? He then mocked liberal protesters who had been demonstrating. You know, they show up in the helmets and the black masks, and they've got clubs, and they've got everything, Trump said. Referring to the far-left militant protest group, Trump exclaimed, Antifa! Leading up to the rally, it was believed Trump could announce a pardon at the rally for Arpaio, the former Arizona sheriff convicted of a misdemeanor charge for not obeying a 2011 order from a judge to stop his anti-immigrant traffic patrols. Earlier Tuesday, the White House said the president would not be announcing a pardon at the rally. But Trump suggested a pardon, which would be his first as president, could be forthcoming. I'll make a prediction. I think he's going to be just fine, Trump said, but I won't do it tonight because I don't want to cause any controversy. Is that okay? Without specifically naming them, Trump dinged the state's two Republican senators, Jeff Flake and John McCain, with whom he has sparred recently. McCain, a frequent Trump critic who was recently diagnosed with brain cancer, irked the president by voting against the Senate's recent plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. One vote away. I will not mention any names, Trump said of McCain. Flake, who has battled with Trump on immigration, has been promoting a book that argues the GOP is in denial about the president. Speaking of Flake, Trump said, and nobody wants me to talk about your other senator who's weak on borders, weak on crime, so I won't talk about him. During his speech, Trump vowed to follow through on his promise to crack down on illegal immigration. He also said he isn't giving up on repealing Obamacare and expressed optimism about reforming the country's tax codes. Speaking of the failed attempt to pass health care reform legislation, Trump said it would have been great health care for Arizona. It would have been great. Tuesday's rally came a day after Trump announced plans to send more troops to Afghanistan, an announcement he highlighted during his speech. Did anybody watch last night? Last night, as you know, I laid out my vision for an honorable and enduring outcome in a very tough place, a place where our country has failed, Afghanistan, Trump said. The president also addressed the recent escalation of rhetoric with North Korea. Trump referenced the country's leader and said he believes Kim Jong-un is starting to respect us. Trump expressed hope that maybe something positive can come about. And by the way, those comments made the headlines in South Korea, which we covered already this morning in the Korean broadcast. High-ranking administration officials and other recognizable conservatives warmed up the crowd before the president spoke, including Vice President Mike Pence and Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson. Several of them painted a picture of a divided country. Quote, "Our lives are too short to let our differences divide us," unquote, Carson said. "Our differences are nothing compared to our shared humanity and the values that unite us." And that was Carson. Alveda King, a niece of Martin Luther King Jr. and evangelist of Franklin Graham, both delivered prayers before Trump's speech. "Well, we come tonight as a troubled nation," Graham said. "We are broken spiritually, we're divided politically, and we're divided racially." President Trump in Arizona last night, in Phoenix last night. And Drudge has a report on the protesters. I don't think anyone was hurt. Let's try to see here. I don't think anyone was hurt, but let's see here. This was all in Pacific time, so it was very late for us. Here we go. A Daily Mail story. News hosts shocked into silence, into near silence, as Trump protester is shot in groin with rubber bullet as police open up with tear gas canisters on crowds after Phoenix rally. Okay, so someone, I guess, was shot in the groin. Trump is in Phoenix for campaign-style rally in key state. He won by 3.5 percentage points over Hillary Clinton. Anti-Trump protesters clashed with police after his rally. Cops fired tear gas after having rocks hurled at them. Gas mask-wearing protester was seen on video kicking a canister back at them before being shot in the groin. Somebody's got good aim. 3 people were arrested on charges related to the protest. 2 officers were treated for heat exhaustion. Okay, just 3 people are arrested and 2 officers are treated for heat exhaustion.
That's pretty peaceful.
That's pretty peaceful, except for the groin thing. Anti-Donald Trump protests turned into skirmishes with police in Phoenix on Tuesday as cops unloaded on the crowds gathered outside his rally with tear gas. In one wince-inducing moment screened on CBS 5 and captured on Twitter, one protester clad in a gas mask kicked a canister of tear gas back at police. Seconds later, a cloud of dust mushroomed up from his groin, and he doubled up in agony. A guy just got shot with a rubber bullet, remarked one host, as the other lapsed into a pained silence. So, yeah, the officers are not messing around at all. The host stuttered as the stricken protester was dragged away by an ally. He was just one of many caught up in the post-rally violence as cops used non-lethal methods to disperse crowds who had thrown rocks and bottles at them.
It's really just a very small percentage of agitators trying to create a problem, paid probably agitators.
Yeah, there are ads on the Craigslist, actually, for these people to come out, yeah. The unrest broke out after Trump swung through the city for a rally designed to fire up his base, which it did. His fans vastly outnumbered anti-Trump protesters. Wow, they admit it. They admit it. Supporters and opponents alike gathered in the 177-degree heat. Wow. But it was only after the rally that violence broke out. Police say the protesters threw water bottles and rocks at their lines. I would have welcomed the water bottles.
Yeah, right. Catch it and start drinking it.
Caused them to respond in kind with tear gas, pepper spray, rubber bullets, and pepper balls. Clouds of the gas filled the night air as the president's supporters began leaving the downtown Phoenix Convention Center. At around 11:20 p.m., Phoenix Police Chief Jerry Williams said that 3 people had been arrested on charges related to the protest. She added that 1 person was arrested on an unrelated warrant and that 2 officers were treated for heat exhaustion. So one guy actually had a warrant out for him, and he was there, and they got him on the unrelated warrant, I guess. And let's see, they have a lot of pictures here, police and protesters. Here are these guys holding, what are they holding? Skateboards. Protesters holding skateboards. A contingent of protesters stayed behind after the clash with police had ended. Their numbers were small. Trump beat Hillary Clinton in Nevada. We're talking about Arizona here. Why are we talking about Nevada all of a sudden? By 3.5 percentage points last year, and is now polling 7 points lower than his election total. So his visit on Tuesday was apparently an attempt to boost that falling number. In contrast with Monday's calm, measured speech about the prolonged war effort in Afghanistan, Tuesday night said Trump's performance was a raucous affair akin to the campaign events that forced American election prognosticators to rewrite every political rulebook. The president's first audience members began arriving 10 hours before the rally's appointed starting time, standing in Phoenix's concrete city center in temperatures that reached 107 degrees.
I'm sure the protesters did not gather that soon.
Probably not. $2 cold water bottles outsold $3 tacos on street corners. Trump fans took turns holding each other's place in line for bathroom breaks and visits to a cool spray mist descending from a nearby Hyatt Hotel's entryway overhang. The most common sight, other than Make America Great Again hats, was umbrella after umbrella sticking up above the crowd, not to protect against much-needed rain, but used as a parasol to tame the heat. The heat took its toll, too, on a promised mass protest that threatened to bring thousands who stayed home. A combined 7,400 people had indicated that they planned to show their disgust for the president via RSVPs on 2 Facebook advertisements for anti-Trump rallies. Only about 500 showed up and found pro-Trump activists creating just as much noise. They shouted "Walk of Shame" in response as the rally-goers made their way to the front of the line that snaked for 6 city blocks. An hour before Trump was scheduled to speak, there were an estimated 8,000 people inside the convention center. One protester outside patrolled back and forth, parading a sign before news cameras that read, "Looks like we've taken this anyone can grow up to be president thing just a bit too far." Another carried a First Amendment message, "It's only fake news if he doesn't like it. Support freedom of the press." One small group inflated a 20-foot-tall Trump effigy dressed as Ku Klux Klan member. On the other side of a police-patrolled barricade stood a man in a T-shirt proclaiming that Antifa is Satan, a reference to leftist anti-fascist protesters who wear black hat masks and carry Mason clubs. He held signs denigrating both the Black Lives Matter movement and the Muslim faith. "BLM are racist thugs," one read. The other, which included a Muslim crescent with a red line through it, said that every real Muslim is a jihadist. And in the Korean broadcast this morning, we played a video of a Korean man who was a missionary in Iran for 19 years. And he studied Iran very much, and he's very much in the David Wood vein. And he gave 5 lectures about Islam, and we just listened to 20 minutes of just one of those lectures this morning. And it was very clear from his lecture that Islam has been a terrorist organization from the beginning. That was its founding, and terrorism is its tradition.
Yeah.
I think there are nice people who are Muslims, but I think they probably don't know their own faith. I don't see how they could be otherwise. Every real Muslim is a jihadist, as Person Sign said. And the thing is that now, Islam is also growing in Korea. They're expanding. Of course, not still minuscule compared to Christianity there, but they are growing.
So Christianity's what, 30% of the population?
Probably something like that, yeah. But if you add up, if you take, this is true in every country, I think. If you add up the numbers that each religious group claims, you come to a number that's much greater than the entire population. All right, it's true in Japan. I'm sure it's true in Korea. It's probably true in the USA as well. So you have to be careful. But when you say 30%, I heard some Christian claim 80%, which is obviously not true. But probably 25, 30% sounds about right to me. Yeah. But a lot of the elite are, I would say, maybe 80% of the elite might be Christian. That might be true. Especially, in many cases, in order to get ahead in the political world, you have to be a Christian. And you have to, especially anyway, we're getting off track here. Behind him stood Trump supporter Ray Martinez in a campaign T-shirt bearing an unusual tagline, Trump 2016, F your feelings. He held a sign aloft as a warning to anti-Trump activists, don't start no SHIT, won't be no SHIT. A woman in the protest crowd was heard yelling. Anyway, she was yelling. Trump has spoken at the Phoenix Convention Center before, a late October 2016 rally where his establishment-rattling immigration message was temporarily overshadowed by a fan who appeared to chant something at reporters as he left the venue. The man, George Lindell, was later claimed he was misunderstood. He said he was actually saying USA, but they heard him say Jew-SA or something like that. Trump's return to Phoenix on Tuesday came with its own newer set of controversies. The White House diffused the most explosive one by telling reporters aboard Air Force One that there would be no announcement of a presidential pardon for embattled former Sheriff Joe Arpaio, a Trump endorser who faces a possible prison term for defying a judge's order related to illegal immigration in 2011. There will be no discussion of that today at any point, and no action will be taken on that front at any point today, White House spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders said. Trump's Arizona swing started with a reminder of his laser focus on illegal immigration, visiting with Yuma, Arizona-based Marines who work with the U.S. Border Patrol agents, and inspecting a Predator drone that they use to patrol the border between the U.S. and Mexico. Administration officials who briefed reporters on Tuesday pointed to a fortified border fence along the section of border nearest Yuma and said it was largely responsible for a dramatic drop in people illegally making it from Mexico to the United States. The number was down 46% in the first 7 months of 2017 compared to 2016. The fence has been up since 2008, however, and numbers have been steadily decreasing since at least 2005. Republican partisans and Trump himself have suggested that his election victory by itself signaled a coming change in policy that made human traffickers rethink their strategies. Yet the president missed a chance to pose in front of the imposing border barrier that was just 15 miles away from his stop in Yuma, with one administration official blaming unspecified security concerns. Trump's visit to Arizona brought the state's sometimes smash-mouth GOP politics to a head, since there is no love lost between Trump and Arizona's two senators, both Republicans. Senator Jeff Flake faces a stiff primary challenge next year from former state lawmaker Kelly Ward, whom Trump has cheered on Twitter as he called Flake weak on borders and toxic in the Senate. Flake's recent anti-Trump manifesto, Conscience of a Conservative, rankled the president. In the first half-dozen pages, he recalls Trump's famed Twitter feed, all noise and no signal. Volatile unpredictability is not a virtue, Flake adds. We have quite enough volatile actors to deal with internationally as it is without becoming one of them. Most telling, Flake skewers his fellow lawmakers who went along with Trump's rise to power as the lesser of two evils, the greater being Hillary Clinton. We pretended that the emperor wasn't naked, he writes. Even worse, we checked our critical faculties at the door and pretended that the emperor was making sense. Despite his stinging critiques, Flake has sided in Congress with many of Trump's proposals, including 2 votes to repeal the Obamacare law. Still, Trump seems prepared to throw one brushback pitch after another at Flake's head, sending a message to other recalcitrant Republicans to get in line and follow his lead. The Republican establishment is firing back. So that is the situation there with Trump in Phoenix last night. Very exciting night in 107 degrees heat. But fortunately, most everyone got home. A few people wound up in jail, but I'm sure they'll be getting home today. All right, let's take a break, and we'll come back with more news from a China Group perspective after this.
Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Carr Firearms Group, with a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Carr Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood, the history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun, to the best in compact concealed carry. Carr Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Carr Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit carr.com today.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Wednesday, August 23rd, 2017. We're going through the articles about President Trump's rally in Phoenix last night. And here is one about how the CNN anchor went on a rant, apparently. Let's see what that's about the president's sanity. Don Lemon, of course, yeah. You would think so, yeah. CNN anchor rants about Trump's sanity as conservative media cheer. Don Lemon leads a post-Phoenix broadcast by questioning Trump's fitness for office. As President Donald Trump's fiery Phoenix campaign rally ended, CNN anchor Don Lemon had an instant reaction. He openly questioned Trump's fitness for office. Well, what do you say to that? I'm just going to speak from the heart here. What we have witnessed is a total eclipse of the facts, Lemon began, adding, he's unhinged. It's embarrassing. That wasn't all. Lemon thundered on. He compared Trump to a petty 6-year-old who creates imaginary enemies. He said Trump's speech was without thought and without reason and devoid of facts. It was devoid of wisdom, Lemon said. There was no gravitas. There was no sanity there. He was like a child blaming a sibling on something else. The CNN's anchor's rant, coming just as Trump finished, stood out among reactions to what amounted to the president's reverting to form. Time and again, Trump has followed more scripted, teleprompter-aided performances with freewheeling improvisational performances that play to the crowd. Some reaction to Trump's speech seemed to have that presumption baked in. On Fox News, pundits weighed the tactics of Trump's speech, ignoring any tonal difference between a solemn Monday night address about Afghanistan policy and the Phoenix speech, which was filled with asides as well as attacks on the media and, though not by name, Arizona's 2 Republican senators, Jeff Flake and John McCain. He played all his greatest hits, Tom Bavin of Real Clear Politics said on Fox News. Obviously, the crowd waited outside. The base is still there. They want to see the show he puts on. But Bavin and other Fox panelists noted that Trump got off track relitigating Charlottesville. If he's going to cover any ground, Bevin said, I'm not sure he made any of that ground up tonight. He was talking to his base, his supporters about his agenda. Fox News host Sean Hannity gave an approving nod to Trump's savage attacks on the media. It's a disgrace how the media lied to the American people, Hannity tweeted during the speech, and they continue to lie every single day. Conservative media, including Breitbart, seemed to approve of Trump's revved-up tone. The site, which is once again led by Steve Bannon, the former White House chief strategist, made a headline of a line from Trump's speech, "They are trying to take our heritage away." Other posts on Breitbart highlighted Trump's long rant against the media and sought to portray Trump as racially inclusive. A story headlined, "Racism Narrative Defeated," noted that a niece of Martin Luther King Jr. spoke at the rally, as did Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson. Back on CNN, Lemon led a roundtable of panelists from various backgrounds in questioning Trump's mental health. This was a Castro-esque speech on length, Castro-esque speech in length, an astonishing chain of lies by a man who is obviously mentally unstable, said Rick Wilson, a Republican operative and frequent outspoken critic of Trump. Later, former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper said the speech made him really question his fitness for office. "I'm beginning to wonder about his motivation for this," he added. "Maybe he is looking for a way out." So, President Trump, exciting as always. Exciting as always.
I'm sure he's going to smash the records in terms of number of articles written about him during his presidency.
Yeah. Just looking through the Breitbart headlines here, live, Donald Trump holds rally in Arizona, calls for the wall, hammers media for Charlottesville lies. They are trying to take away our history and our heritage. Antifa leftists riot in Phoenix. CNN blames Trump's angry, divisive speech. Watch Phoenix protesters take a pepper ball to the groin. Trump supporters go through walk of shame. MLK Eunice, Dr. Alveda King, Ben Carson speak at rally. Racism narrative defeated. Honor the troops, cherish the Constitution, including Second Amendment. Media dividing country, giving a platform to hate speech. Calls out Antifa for violence. Threatens government shutdown if Dems don't fund wall. Sheriff Joe can feel good. NYT, McConnell doubts Trump can save presidency. So that's the first. The New York Times one is the first one that was not about the Phoenix rally. Everything else on Breitbart is about the Phoenix rally. Here we go. CNN's Lemon on Trump's speech. We just witnessed a total eclipse of the facts. Trump clearly trying to ignite a civil war in this country. Reformers slam amnesty deal floated by Donald Trump's aides. Yeah, that's a different story. This one is really something. I thought this was a joke, and I think a lot of people thought this was a joke in the beginning. ESPN changed an announcer for a football game at the University of Virginia. Now, the announcer who was sent to Pittsburgh instead of Virginia, name is Robert Lee. All right. But he's an Asian American.
He's not a descendant of Robert Lee?
Probably not. Probably not.
I think Lee is kind of a common name in Asia, right?
Lee is a very common name in Korea, yes. The L-E-E spelling is common among South Koreans. Mm-hmm. North Koreans generally prefer to spell it with an R, R-H-E-E or something like that, or R or I or something like that. And I think it's all there are a lot of Lees in China as well, I believe. But this one, ESPN polled an Asian American broadcaster named Robert Lee from a University of Virginia football game because of his name, and ESPN admits it. They admit it. Lee is being moved to cover a game in Pittsburgh instead. So Pittsburgh is safe for Lees, but Charlottesville not. We collectively made a decision with Robert to switch games as these tragic events in Charlottesville were unfolding simply because of the coincidence of his name, ESPN officials disclosed in a statement obtained from ESPN spokesman Derek Volner. In that moment, it felt right to all parties.
You know what they'd have to do? They'd have to put a black cloth over his head.
Yes, they would.
They'd have to cover him up during the live broadcast.
Yes. People may not be aware of what you're talking about. What Greg is referring to is that the Charlottesville city officials have decided to put black cloths over all of their Confederate monuments. Isn't that what Antifa does? They wear black.
Right.
They wear black.
Yeah, I think it's a Islamic cover, maybe.
Yeah, it's Islamic.
A bark.
Isn't this racist? Isn't this racist? I think it's racist to cover statues of white people with black cloths. I think that's racist. Oh, my goodness. The world that we live in today. Planned Parenthood supporters say that abortion reduces black crime.
Talk about racism.
I guess, well, I don't know. See, Breitbart has a photograph of a big billboard. Is this a billboard or a banner? The most dangerous place for an African American is in the womb. It doesn't sound like Planned Parenthood.
No, it sounds
yeah. Which is true, by the way. Yeah. A minority pro-life student says a Planned Parenthood supporter told her during a fundraiser that abortion is a good thing because it reduces black crime. In a post at Students for Life of America, Bethany Jansen, SFLA's Rocky Mountain Regional Coordinator, writes that minority college student Kimberly was confronted by a middle-aged white man who supports Planned Parenthood when SFLA was protesting outside a Planned Parenthood fundraiser. Jansen continues, a middle-aged white man who stopped with his family inquired why Kimberly, a minority graduate of a local university, was holding a "We Don't Need Planned Parenthood" sign. Kimberly explained that Planned Parenthood does abortions which end an innocent human life. His response, abortion is good because the crime rate has lowered since the 60s due to a reduction in black crime. Kimberly said she told the man that about 66% of black children are aborted. I asked him if less black people meant less crime, and he said that's exactly what he meant. Whoa! Bam, boom, bam. That is definitely racist. Mm-hmm. Kimberly restated that Jansen reports. The Planned Parenthood supporters commented, disgusting, but underscores what the pro-life movement has been saying all along, SFLA President Kristen Hawkins said to Breitbart News in a statement. Planned Parenthood is not a friend to minority communities. Their employees have been caught accepting donations to specifically target black babies. That was Veritas, right? Mm-hmm. Project Veritas. Their founder was a known eugenicist. They've made it their mission to prey off anyone they consider vulnerable. Our nation reels in unrest from last week's events in Charlottesville. It is important that we recognize the racism that many abortion supporters possess, Jansen writes. In the wake of the Charlottesville deadly protests, radical left-wing groups such as Black Lives Matter and Antifa are demanding that more Confederate monuments be torn down and that those two American founding fathers who owned slaves be altered or removed. Yet those groups are in league with Planned Parenthood, who was founded by eugenicist Margaret Sanger. Sanger's bust and other images are still celebrated in the Smithsonian Institution's National Portrait Gallery, despite a call by a national group of black ministers to have them removed. None of the Black Lives Matter or Antifa protesters who have condemned the racist Confederate or Founding Fathers monuments have called for the removal of Sanger's bust from the National Portrait Gallery. In a letter to the gallery's director 2 years ago, ministers taking a stand wrote, "Perhaps the gallery is unaware that Ms. Sanger supported black eugenics, a racist attitude toward black and other minority babies, an elitist attitude toward those she regards as the feeble-minded." Speaking at rallies of Ku Klux Klan women and communications with Hitler sympathizers, also the notorious Negro Project, which sought to limit, if not eliminate, black births, was her brainchild. Despite these well-documented facts of history, her bust sits proudly in your gallery as a hero of justice. The obvious incongruity is staggering. This is the group of black ministers writing here. Perhaps your institution is a victim of propaganda advanced by those who support abortion. Nevertheless, a prestigious institution like the National Portrait Gallery should have higher standards and subject its honorees to higher scrutiny. Like Hitler, Sanger advocated eugenics, the extermination of people she deemed undesirables. Finding that the American people rejected that idea, she then switched to birth control as a way of controlling the population growth of black people and others. Yeah. People don't know this about Margaret Sanger or about Planned Parenthood, that it has this background in eugenics, in an effort to reduce black babies, black births among black people. Back then, when Margaret Sanger, I guess, in the early 20th century, science was being used to try and claim that black people had smaller brains or something like that. I can't remember. But science was being used in this kind of a racist way to support black eugenics. And that aspect of science is no longer continuing. And yet we still have Planned Parenthood. And
they're prominent forces in African-American neighborhoods.
And liberals, quote, liberals support it. That's why we can no longer call these people liberals. They are fascists. They are fascists. Planned Parenthood here, similarly, Ryan Baumberger, Chief Creative Officer of the Radiance Foundation, told Breitbart News, quote, museums educate the public about history. The NPG, however, wants to create a dangerous and fictionalized version of it. Planned Parenthood was born in eugenic racism and elitism, and Margaret Sanger was the mother who gave birth to the world's largest abortion chain. In the city where Planned Parenthood began, more black babies are aborted than born alive, according to the New York Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. This is not the result of justice. It is the result of animus.
Seems to me that denying our history, the truth of our history, is a very dangerous path to go down. Whether it's destroying all the Confederate aspects of our history, or even Margaret Sanger, we should know about our history. We should be educated, and we should learn from it. It'd be like taking down the places where the Holocaust happened.
Yeah. Exactly. And in the principle, we learn about history, and Father was very much interested in the providential history, the history of the providence, because history shows how God has been working until now. And actually, it shows the battle between God and Satan. And sometimes, God would win, sometimes Satan would win, and probably more often than not, Satan would win. But what we are today, the principle teaches that we are the product of everything that's come before us. And so we need to understand that, and we need to overcome the failures of the past, and we need to build on the victories of the past. So in the principal teaching and Father's teaching, history was very, very important. He would often talk about historical figures, and he would often, of course, describe, for example, communism, a present-day phenomenon. But he would talk about how communism actually was a product of a very long-standing battle between God and Satan. And if we look at Islam, this Korean minister that I was talking about a minute ago also talks about how Islam is actually just the most recent form in which Satan is trying to attack God's salvation providence. Satan tried to kill the babies when Moses was born, but Moses escaped that and became a central figure in God's providence. So Satan tried to kill all the babies when Jesus was born, but Jesus escaped that and became, of course, a central figure at that time as the Messiah. And Satan thought that he had succeeded when Jesus was killed on the cross, but then God's secret weapon, this pastor says, was the resurrection. And of course, he doesn't understand our principle in many ways, and how Jesus was only able to bring salvation in a spiritual sense. But then he says that in the 7th century, then Satan tried again. This time by going into Muhammad, as he had gone into the Pharaoh who tried to kill all the babies at Moses, and went into Herod and so forth, and that from the beginning, Islam has been an effort by Satan to kill off Judeo-Christianity and to derail and destroy God's salvation providence. So we need to know history because this has all been going on. And in order to understand Islam today, to understand Christianity today, we need to understand history. But the left wants to erase all that. Who was it that one of our recent guests on the King's Report was saying that for the left, history begins today. That everything in the past is irrelevant, and we don't need to know it, we don't need to learn it. And this is why they've been cutting down on history lessons in history, in school.
And rewriting history.
Rewriting history, yeah. And so they just want to deny everything. Everything in the past is evil, and that they're only concerned about the present. But this is what happens then is that we eventually are doomed to repeat history if we don't learn it.
The King made an interesting point the other morning that if you're going to be serious about exposing the evils of slavery, then you'd have to cover the entire city of Mecca.
Yes.
As the largest slave trade city in the world.
That's right.
So can't be a double standard here. You have to go after, if you're truly a liberal in today's culture, you have to go after Islam as being one of the biggest slave trade cultures in history.
And even today.
Yeah.
Even today. Women are held in virtual slavery, slavery, I would say. And where are the demonstrations against that? Where are the demonstrations against Saudi Arabia not allowing women to even drive cars or to wear certain headgear? And even buying and selling of slaves continues in Somalia and in other Islamic African countries. Where is the Antifa there? Why are they concentrating on efforts to bring down the United States, and after all, it's a Christianity, especially Protestant Christianity, that has been ending slavery throughout history and is at the forefront of that movement even now.
And it's the largest prosperity of minorities in the world.
Yes.
Is here in America.
Yes.
So this is all through Protestant Christianity.
Last year we really dodged a bullet when we managed to defeat Hillary Clinton, who wanted to bring in migrants from Islamic majority countries, just as they are doing in Germany. But now, what are being called the Democrats in the White House are trying to go the opposite way, to bring in Hillary's policies. Immigration reformers are promising to block a proposed amnesty bargain by President Donald Trump's pro-immigration globalist aides and their counterparts on both sides of Capitol Hill. Now that Bannon has gone back to Breitbart, I think a lot of Breitbart stories are sort of in that vein. I think they're sort of continuing the battle that was taking place in the White House, and now we can see what was going on there. The putative deal would grant an amnesty to the 800,000 beneficiaries of President Barack Obama's so-called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals amnesty announced in June 2012 in exchange for a package of real or symbolic benefits for Americans. If Trump aides are left to their own devices, they would exchange this for a few trinkets. So violating Trump's campaign promise before the 2018 and 2020 elections, said Ira Melman, a spokesman for FAIR, the Federal for American Immigration Reform Federation. Anyway, form. The proposed amnesty from Trump's aides is a trial balloon to see how much they can get away with, to see how much pushback they get from Trump's voters, said Mark Kikorian, director of the Center for Immigration Studies. All right, let's come back after a break and look at this in a little more detail. See you in a minute or so. Are we off?
Car Arms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood, the history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun, to the best in compact concealed carry, Kahr Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Kahr Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit kahr.com today.
And welcome back to the King's Report for Wednesday, August 23rd, 2017. And Breitbart has a story on headline, Trump's Merkel moment. West Wing Dems plan to keep DACA will increase illegal immigration pull factors. A new McClatchy report has revealed that current White House staffers, including John Kelly, Ivanka Trump, and Jared Kushner, are pushing the president to continue with amnesty for illegal immigrants in exchange for border wall funding, as well as curbs on illegal immigration and the online E-Verify system. If the president accedes, this may be his Merkel moment, reflective of the German chancellor who compromised on her nation's borders and rule of law with her now infamous and subsequently dropped "we can do it" call to let millions of migrants into Europe. She didn't just let them in, her policy encouraged them. One of the greatest pull factors in Europe's migrant crisis was the German leader's abdication of her duties towards her nation, from failing to consult the German parliament to claiming that a mass of economic migrants were in fact Syrian refugees fit for high-skilled labor. Merkel irrevocably changed the face of her nation in one fell swoop, something candidate Trump seemed to understand. Far from being the doctors, nurses, or engineers she was claiming to open her arms to, employment and skill sets amongst recent migrants is devastatingly poor. In July, the German Federal Employment Agency admitted that 74% of new migrants had no qualifications and would likely only be able to do menial labor jobs. Just 54 of those recently arrived found jobs with top firms in the country, with 50 of those going to the German post office. That's not 54%. That's not 54 people. Just 54 of those recently arrived found jobs with top firms in the country. Just 54 people.
Out of the millions.
Out of the millions, yeah. It's not like the appetite is there and the jobs simply aren't. Germany has a history over 5 decades long with Turkish inward migration. I use this constituency to give Merkel the benefit of the doubt. No first wave or second or first generation of migrants, despite her lofty promises, have ever got steady jobs that quickly, nor have they integrated it immediately. So let's look at Germany's Turkish population, those who have been in the country for over half a century. Figures published in July 2017 revealed that almost every second Turk of working age in the nation is economically inactive. The major German newspaper Die Welt added in its report on the matter, quote, the vast majority of the Turks who are economically inactive declare that, at least for the moment, they are not interested in a job, unquote. Just this week, it became clear that Turkey's President Recep Erdogan was able to influence millions of voters across Germany, especially with the country's federal elections on the horizon. Speaking to a Turkish news agency last week, Erdogan insisted, I would say to all compatriots in Germany, do not support the Christian Democrats, not the Christian Democrats, not the SPD, Social Democrats, not the Greens. They are all enemies of Turkey. The decision President Trump has to make vis-a-vis DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is not a direct parallel. Firstly, obviously, this is about children who have entered the country illegally. Secondly, there are no immediate low-skilled jobs or electoral implications. But there are several parallels, the first being the undermining of the rule of law. Even the most liberal Western leader in the world today, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, discouraged illegal immigration into his country, stating, "If I could directly speak to the people seeking asylum, I'd like to remind them that there's no advantage to crossing into Canada illegally. Our rules, our principles, and our laws apply to everyone." What DACA does is nullify such principles, the same as which President Trump made during his political campaign pre-November 2016. In a Phoenix speech in August 2016, almost exactly a year ago from his Phoenix speech of today, Canada Trump stated unequivocally, "We will immediately terminate President Obama's 2 illegal executive amnesties in which he defied federal law and the Constitution to give amnesty to approximately 5 million illegal immigrants. In a Trump administration, all immigration laws will be enforced. As with any law enforcement activity, we will set priorities, but unlike this administration, no one will be immune or exempt from enforcement, and ICE and Border Patrol officers will be allowed to do their jobs." This was in August 2016. He went on, "Anyone who has entered the United States illegally is subject to deportation. That is what it means to have laws and to have a country." The press release on last year's speech, like all pre-2017 content, has been removed from the official Donald J. Trump campaign website. The second parallel to be aware of is the aforementioned pull factor. In 2014, the Department of Homeland Security admitted that of the Obama-era amnesty policies, migration pull factors include reunification with family members already in the United States and successful migration attempts. That is, most 98% of OTMUCs are issued a notice to appear and not immediately removed from the United States. Last year, only 1,700 UCs were repatriated to their home countries. What is a UC? I guess that's a undocumented something. The report also stated, HSI Intel assesses with high confidence that reunification with family members already in the United States continues to be a pull factor for UCs from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. I'm not sure what UC stands for. Furthermore, while they noted no single factor causes OTMUC migration to the United States, they did admit several factors combined to cause this, including poor economies and violence in home countries, potential employment opportunities in the United States, family reunification, and success at not being immediately repatriated drive OTMUC migration to the United States. Even the most ardent of establishment European politicians has admitted similar. Donald Tusk, president of the European Council, said in 2015 that exceptionally easy access to Europe is one of the main pull factors. With a renewed pull factor, as the DHS report stated, in the form of success at not being immediately repatriated, we can expect border crossing attempts to rise if the Trump administration fails to rescind DACA. In a sense, the latter part of this year, the West Wing's approach to DACA therefore represents a miracle moment for President Trump. Given his propensity to slam the German chancellor on immigration, but at the same time laud her as his favorite world leader, the president's electoral base would do well to place increased scrutiny on this policy position. So DAC, as it explains here, is a policy that applies to children who were brought to the United States by their parents, when they were 2 years old, 3 years old, 4, maybe 5. So they didn't know that they were breaking the law. They were just coming with their parents. And now they've been in the U.S., they've grown up in the U.S., and many cases have graduated from high school and have gotten jobs, maybe even gotten jobs, and many times they're not even aware that they're here illegally because they were issued false birth certificates or something like that, and they or sometimes they don't have documents at all, and so in many cases they try to go to college and that's when they find out that they're not here legally or they don't have the proper documentation in many cases, and they're in American society, and they only speak English in many cases, so their Spanish is not fluent, and when they are sent back to their country of origin, and some have been sent back, they are kind of lost there because they cannot speak the language, they cannot function in that society. They were functioning in the U.S. society. So it's a very tragic situation. But on the other hand, even though it's tragic, it's as this article points out, the United States does need to maintain a rule of law, and I can see how the greater good here would probably require for Donald Trump to end that amnesty that was created by the Obama administration. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's a tough call. I think, I think the immigration, you started the conversation with Germany and Turkey, and I think that's a pretty disastrous result. 50% unemployment after 50 years of immigration is what I heard. That's pretty bad. That means that the Turkish, and I've heard this from my wife and others who are from Germany, that the Turkish population has not integrated well into German society. They're still looked at as a separate kind of community, whereas I would think I see the Hispanic contribution to American life very positive. I see that as, and I think the fundamental difference probably is their Judeo-Christian background. Most Mexican people are from a Christian background, Catholic background, so their ability to integrate well into American society is good, and it's a positive influence, and they're looking to integrate. Whereas I think people who do immigrate from Islamic countries have no desire to integrate. They want to keep separate, and I think other communities the same way. So I think that's really the fundamental point of difference, is that you have immigration populations that are willing to integrate and willing to become part of the American fabric, whereas you have other communities that are not willing to do so.
So do you think that there could be a kind of a case-by-case amnesty for Hispanic Americans who came here illegally as a child, and they're speaking English fluently, they're completely integrated into American society? As you said, there is a greater propensity for them to be integrated. So this parallel between the Turkish population in Germany and the Hispanic population in America does not really hold true, doesn't it?
It's not a really good comparison. And I would have a little bit more sympathy and compassion toward those who have been raised in America, or doing well in America, contributing to the workforce. I would say, that would be a good case for amnesty. But for people who have no desire to really integrate and become part of America and share its values, then that would, of course, would weigh in.
So it's certainly a tough call, and I don't think anyone has really come up with a good solution to this problem yet. It probably requires some kind of a wise solution America is certainly richer for the presence of a lot of these people, but especially for the Muslim population, I would say it is not. Already in Britain and London, and of course in Paris and in other European capitals, there are areas where Sharia law is being enforced, and they're setting up basically their own jurisprudence system, rather than integrating to the local system based on Judeo-Christian tradition. Because from the beginning, Islam's objective has been to supplant Judeo-Christianity, to eliminate Judeo-Christianity, because its background is in a desire by the spiritual forces, that is by Satan, to eliminate God's salvation providence, which is centered on Judeo-Christianity. And so there's going to come a time when, just as we fought, just as a Father's movement fought communism, there's going to come a time when we are going to have to fight Islam.
Well, there's going to be a global crusade that will take place, because the Islamic ideology, the political ideology of Islam, will not accept defeat. It will not accept anything other than global conquest. That's its mission statement. It's in the Quran that anybody that does not adhere and submit to Allah is an infidel, and infidels are worthy of death. That's the fundamental bottom line of Islam. And when you have such an ideology that is so intolerant to other faiths, then it will lead to a conflict. There's just like in the Crusades, the king pointed out correctly that the Crusades was a defensive war that Christians fought against the Islamic forces moving into Europe. It was not an aggressive act by Christians to defeat Islam. It was really just to save their nations from conquest.
And President Trump is playing a role right now in that effort to stop Islam from coming into America. Europe, I think, has really gone already past the point of no return, I would say, especially countries like Sweden, France also, probably Germany. Have in the Middle Ages, at least the Christians fought at the gates of Vienna and in what is it, southwestern France, but now the gates are open.
They're inside the countries. In
they're
millions.
They're
millions
in the walls.
Of them.
They've come into the walls.
Yeah.
It's
voluntarily let in.
It's voluntarily let in. Yes. Not
That's
even
crazy.
a Trojan horse, just voluntarily.
Right.
Come on in, rape us, pillage us.
Clearly the work of the devil, if you think about, going back to the minister you're talking about, this is really a concerted effort to destroy Christianity in Europe.
Yes. Because, as the king said, Europe has left Christ, and when you leave Christ, you get taken over by Satan. That's the choice that you make, and Europe has made that choice. So, speaking of our Savior, President Trump, national Savior, President Trump, the relationship...
On the macro level.
On the macro level, yes. McConnell in private doubts if Trump can save presidency. This is a New York Times article. The relationship between President Trump and Senator Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, has disintegrated to the point that they have not spoken to each other in weeks. And Mr. McConnell has privately expressed uncertainty that Mr. Trump will be able to salvage his administration after a series of summer crises.
He better worry about salvaging his seat because he has like 18% approval.
Yeah.
I don't think he needs to be worrying about the presidencies.
Yeah, we'll check later on when he's up for re-election.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know?
No,
Is he up for next year? We'll have to see. But what was once an uneasy governing alliance has curdled into a feud of mutual resentment and sometimes outright hostility, complicated by the position of McConnell's wife, Elaine L. Chao, in Mr. Trump's cabinet, according to more than a dozen people briefed on their imperiled partnership. Angry phone calls and private bad-mouthing have devolved into open conflict, with the president threatening to oppose Republican senators who cross him, and Mr. McConnell mobilizing to their defense. The rupture between Mr. Trump and Mr. McConnell comes at a highly perilous moment for Republicans who face a number of urgent deadlines when they return to Washington next month. Congress must approve new spending measures and raise the statutory limit on government borrowing within weeks of reconvening, and Republicans are hoping to push through an elaborate rewrite of the federal tax code. There is scant room for legislative error on any front. A protracted government shutdown or a default on sovereign debt could be disastrous for the economy and for the party that controls the White House and both chambers of Congress. Yet, Mr. Trump and Mr. McConnell are locked in a political Cold War. Neither man would comment for this article. Can you imagine that phone call? Hello, Mr. President. Would you like to say anything about Mitch McConnell that we can print? They can print? No. Don Stewart, a spokesman for Mr. McConnell, noted that the senator and the president had shared goals and pointed to tax reform, infrastructure, funding the government, not defaulting on the debt, passing the defense authorization bill. Still, the back and forth has been dramatic. In a series of tweets this month, Mr. Trump criticized Mr. McConnell publicly and berated him in a phone call that quickly devolved into a profane shouting match. During the call, which, how come no one has leaked that transcript? Let's have that transcript. During the call, which Mr. Trump initiated on August 9 from his New Jersey golf club, the president accused Mr. McConnell of bungling the health care issue. He was even more animated about what he had intimated was the Senate leader's refusal to protect him from investigations of Russian interference in the 2016 election, according to Republicans briefed on the conversation. Mr. McConnell was fumed over Mr. Trump's regular threats against fellow Republicans and criticism of Senate rules, and questioned Mr. Trump's understanding of the presidency in a public speech. Mr. McConnell has made sharper comments in private, describing Mr. Trump as entirely unwilling to learn the basics of governing. In offhand remarks, Mr. McConnell has expressed a sense of bewilderment about where Mr. Trump's presidency may be headed, and has mused about whether Mr. Trump will be in a position to lead the Republican Party into next year's elections and beyond, according to people who have spoken to him directly. While maintaining a pose of public reserve, Mr. McConnell expressed horror to advisors last week after Mr. Trump's comments equating white supremacists in Charlottesville, Virginia, with protesters who rallied against them. Mr. Trump's most explosive remark came at a news conference in Manhattan, where he stood beside Ms. Chao, the Transportation Secretary. Ms. Chao, deflecting a question about the tensions between her husband and the president she serves, told reporters, "I stand by my man, both of them." Mr. McConnell signaled to business leaders that he was deeply uncomfortable with Mr. Trump's comments. Several who resigned advisory roles in the Trump administration contacted Mr. McConnell's office after the fact and were told that Mr. McConnell fully understood their choices, 3 people briefed on the conversation said. Mr. Trump has also continued to badger and threaten Mr. McConnell's Senate colleagues, including Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona, whose Republican primary challenger was praised by Mr. Trump last week. Great to see that Dr. Kelly Ward is running against Jeff Flake, who is weak on borders, crime, and a non-factor in Senate, he tweeted last week. He's toxic. At a campaign rally in Phoenix on Tuesday, Mr. Trump alluded to Mr. Flake unfavorably, referring to him as weak on borders and weak on crime, without mentioning him by name. He referred to Mr. McConnell only in passing, calling on him to abolish the Senate filibuster. Senate Republican officials have said before the rally that they would stand up for Mr. Flake against any attacks. As a Republican super PAC aligned with Mr. McConnell released a web ad on Tuesday assailing Ms. Ward as a fringe-dwelling conspiracy theorist. When it comes to the Senate, there's an Article 5 understanding. An attack against one is an attack against us all. The Senate said Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican of South Carolina, who has found himself in Mr. Trump's sights many times, invoking the NATO alliance's mutual defense doctrine. The fury among Senate Republicans toward Mr. Trump has been building since last month, even before he lashed out at Mr. McConnell. Some of them blame the president for not being able to rally the party around any version of legislation to repeal the Affordable Care Act, accusing him of not knowing even the basics about policy. Senate Republicans also say strong-arm tactics from the White House backfired, making it harder to cobble together votes and have left bad feelings in the caucus. When Mr. Trump addressed a Boy Scout jamboree last month in West Virginia, White House aides told Senator Shelley Moore Capito, a Republican from the state whose support was in doubt, that she could only accompany him on Air Force One if she committed to voting for the health care bill. She declined the invitation, noting that she could not commit to voting for a measure she had not seen, according to a Republican briefed on the conversation. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska also told colleagues that when Mr. Trump's Interior Secretary threatened to pull back federal funding for her state, she felt boxed in and unable to vote for the health care bill. In a show of solidarity, albeit one planned well before Mr. Trump took aim at Mr. Flake, Mr. McConnell will host a $1,000 per person dinner on Friday in Kentucky for the Arizona senator, as well as for Senator Dean Heller of Nevada, who is also facing a Trump-inspired primary race next year, and Senator Deb Fischer of Nebraska. Mr. Flake is expected to attend the event. Former Senator Judd Gregg of New Hampshire, a Republican who is close to Mr. McConnell, said frustration with Mr. Trump was boiling over in the chamber. Mr. Gregg blamed the president for undermining congressional leaders and said the House and Senate would have to govern on their own if Mr. Trump can't participate constructively. Failure to do things like keeping the government open and passing a tax bill is the functional equivalent of playing Russian roulette with all the chambers loaded, Mr. Gregg said. Others in the party divided blame between Mr. Trump and Mr. McConnell. Hal Hoffman, a former finance chairman of the Republican National Committee who has been supportive of Mr. McConnell, said Mr. McConnell was culpable because he has failed to deliver legislative victories. Ultimately, it's been Mitch's responsibility, and I don't think he's done much, Mr. Hoffman said. but Mr. Hoffman predicted that Mr. McConnell would likely outlast the president. I think he's going to blow up, self-implode, Mr. Hoffman said of Mr. Trump. I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. McConnell pulls back his support of Trump and tries to go it alone. An all-out clash between Mr. Trump and Mr. McConnell would play out between men whose strengths and weaknesses are very different. Mr. Trump is a political amateur, still unschooled in the ways of Washington, but he maintains a vice-like grip on the affections of the Republican base. Mr. McConnell is a soft-spoken career politician with virtuoso mastery of political fundraising and tactics, but he had no mass following to speak of. Mr. McConnell while baffled at Mr. Trump's penchant for internecine attacks, is a ruthless pragmatist and has given no overt indication that he plans to seek more drastic conflict. Despite his private battles with Mr. Trump, Mr. McConnell has sent reassuring signals with his public conduct. On Monday, he appealed in Louisville, Kentucky, with Stephen Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, for a discussion of tax policy. Mr. McConnell's Senate colleagues, however, have grown bolder. The combination of the president's frontal attacks on the Senate Republicans and his claim that there were fine people marching with white supremacists in Charlottesville has emboldened lawmakers to criticize Mr. Trump in withering terms. Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee rebuked Mr. Trump last week for failing to demonstrate the stability nor some of the competence required of presidents. On Monday, Senator Susan Collins of Maine said in a television interview that she was uncertain Mr. Trump would be the Republican presidential nominee in 2020. There are a few recent precedents for the rift. The last time a president turned on legislative leaders of his own party was in 2002, when allies of George W. Bush helped force Trent Lott to step down as Senate Minority Leader after racially charged remarks at a birthday party for Senator Strom Thurmond, a Republican of South Carolina. For the moment, Mr. McConnell appears to be far more secure in his position and perhaps immune to coercion from the White House. Republicans are unlikely to lose control of the Senate in 2018, and Mr. Trump has no allies in the Senate who have shown an appetite for combat with Mr. McConnell. Still, some allies of Mr. Trump on the right, including Stephen K. Bannon, who stepped down last week as Mr. Trump's chief strategist, welcome more direct conflict with Mr. McConnell and congressional Republicans. Roger J. Stone Jr., we've heard about him, right? A Republican strategist who has advised Mr. Trump for decades, said the president needs to take a scalp in order to force cooperation from Republican elites who have resisted his agenda. Mr. Stone urged Mr. Trump to make an example of one or more Republicans like Mr. Flake, who have refused to give full support for his administration. Well, we're coming close to the end of our broadcast, so I can't go all the way to the end. Do you want to comment on this article, Greg?
It seems like Mr. Trump, President Trump, is not building a team in Congress or the Senate. So
you know a lot about team building, yes. So maybe you should be in the White House.
I don't know. Probably not. But, yeah, I think this is a possible weakness of President Trump. He really publicly displays his dissatisfaction for people rather than building a team and trying to,
But he couldn't be as successful as he is in business without knowing something about team building.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah. I just think somehow, roasting people publicly rather than trying to win them to his side is not necessarily going to play out very well. I think the deciding point will be the 2018 elections. How many people are campaigning on Trump issues versus people who are separating themselves from Trump? I think he still has a huge following among the people. The Republican base is really a Trump supporters. So it will be interesting to see how these 2018 elections play out, whether people will be shown with pictures with Trump or not. I think that's going to be interesting to see.
Let me just check when Mitch McConnell is up for re-election before we go off. I'm just curious about that point. He was... I don't see it immediately here. Since 2015, so he was elected in 14, so that he would be up for re-election in 2020, not 6
years.
But, so he's up for election in 2020, not next year. And even the New York Times acknowledges that the Democrats are not likely to take over the Senate as a result of next year's elections, because the Democrats have a lot more seats to defend than the Republicans. I think something like out of the 33 people who are up for election in the Senate next year, 25 are Democrats or something like that. And so it's actually an opportunity for Republicans to even gain seats next year, because a number of those 25 Democrats are in states that Trump won last year. So we'll have to see what happens there. Especially in Pennsylvania, we have a Democratic senator who is up for election next year, and Pennsylvania was won by Donald Trump, as we all know.
And I guess it's Trump's responsibility to separate the sheep and the goats within government. Right?
Yeah, and he did. Trump did run against the Republican establishment, and he's still running against the Republican establishment. We didn't want him in the first place, and perhaps only finally supported him grudgingly because they considered him to be better than Hillary, sort of the lesser of two evils. And so now there's a lot of, and there are a lot of now. What the Breitbart refers to as the Dems in the White House, the Democrats in the White House, specifically, Ivanka and Jared and some of the generals, maybe. We don't exactly know what their political stance is, but certainly Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner are Democrats. And so Trump is being pushed in that way as well. So, and his Afghanistan speech reflected that. His Phoenix address last night sort of reflected his roots and his ability to snap back and go back to his base. And we'll have to see what happens with that. I hope he does pardon Joe Arpaio. I hope he does figure out something with the DACA, but something with the DACA, and certainly continue to keep out Muslim terrorists coming in as migrants. That's very important, and securing the border. There may be a lot of confusion and crisis next month in September. As the New York Times pointed out, the government debt limit is coming up. Of course, if Trump vetoes that, then the Senate can pass it anyway with a 2/3 majority, in the House as well. So I think a lot of things will happen next month. I expect it'll be more exciting even than the summer. That's what I'm expecting. So with that, we will end our broadcast for today. The King will be back tomorrow, and we'll see you tomorrow at 5 a.m. With the second King of China, Hyungjin Moon. And we'll be very interested in see what he has to say tomorrow. All right, thank you for joining us. Godspeed, God bless, and may His kingdom come.